English translation, 548th Contact Saturday, the 1st of December 2012, 10:12 hours.
Hello, Ptah. You are here early today. You are here early today. I did not expect you until this afternoon for correction.
Today it is no different for me because I have to leave immediately after the correction work in the afternoon. Greetings, my friend. Unfortunately, it will not be possible to work through all the corrections today, so we have to divide the work into different days. If it were possible for Bernadette, I would come back next Wednesday afternoon and then again next Saturday for the correction work. I think we will have to work on the corrections again on 2 afternoons.
All right, so be it. So I will ask Bernadette if it is possible for her to take time off next Wednesday and Saturday for the correction work, after which I will let Florina or Anjana know and you will be informed by her.
Well, so be it, as you also said. But we still wanted to discuss some things concerning your new book, which is also why I came here so early.
Of course. Do you want to start right away, or can I ask you some questions that I have to ask you first?
I think it would be good if I first explained certain important aspects of depression, after which I would like to answer your questions.
Whatever you say. Then go ahead, because I am all ears.
In addition to everything I have explained to you during my last visits, there is something else you should mention in your new book. These are important things that you should not miss to include in the book. But now we should turn to your questions because the time is quite advanced.
You are right, it is 12:20 HRS. How quickly time passes, and there is also a question about that. The earthly scientists have all kinds of explanations for why, as the human being gets older, time seems to run faster. They say that, among other explanations, the whole body's metabolism changes and so forth, which means that the body and consciousness are subject to a different perception of time. This explains that time runs faster for the body, which is also felt to be the case. But I have a different opinion, which I have already explained before. But what do you think about it?
The fact that the cell balance changes is of course in accordance with reality, but it has no influence on the perception of time, etc., as is wrongly explained. In truth, it actually is accurate what you already explained twice before, namely that the cause is consciousness-based increased activity occurring at an older age, under normal circumstances.
May I?
If you like.
Then I will only finish the sentence you have begun. For it is the case that with increasing age the activity of consciousness, respectively of thoughts and feelings, increases, which means that the activity of consciousness is constantly demanded more and more, and this by the appearance of a more extensive activity of thoughts from which naturally also corresponding feelings arise. This mental-emotional multi-activity, which arises with increasing age, is based on the fact that the human beings who are getting older are constantly thinking more and more about their existence, their life, about everyday things, world events, their family members or friends and acquaintances, as well as about special factors and 1,000 other things that concern them. This is of course very time-consuming, whereby a lot of time passes with the fast-running thoughts and feelings, the course of which is no longer perceived in terms of intensity and depth of thought and feeling, because the perception of time simply fades into the background. Therefore, the human beings wonder why time passes so quickly without realizing and consciously becoming aware of its course. And only then, when he detaches himself from his enormous mental-emotional activity and turns again to the presence of reality and its truth, does he perceive how much time has actually passed during his mental-emotional work. Thus, the human beings with increasing age normally get the impression, when they are constantly and intensively engaged in thought-emotional work, that time seems to pass faster than in younger years. This, however, only applies to the human beings who, as they grow older, really occupy their consciousness and the world of thoughts and feelings intensively with good and positive values, and do not find time to let the consciousness thought-feeling factors pass by unused. So the human beings of this kind are constantly busy with their consciousness, thoughts and feelings in a good, healthy, and positive way, and therefore have no time to be negative, negating, idle, and pessimistic. They're also busy all the time, so they always have something to do, and they may also continue their education in terms of consciousness and knowledge. This has the enormous advantage that no boredom and no depressions arise, which is the opposite. However, with the human beings who, as they grow older, let their consciousness, thoughts, and feelings drift further and further away in a minimal way, as they have already done throughout their whole life. It is characteristic of the human beings that time does not want to pass for them, and that it seems to stand still. For them, time simply does not want to go on fast enough, because they are constantly occupied with inner problems that do not want to end, and therefore become an ever heavier mental, emotional, psychological burden. The result is that they are constantly vegging out in depressive behavior and falling into ever new depressive forms, which they also maintain as they get older. As a result, they slowly but surely become mentally, emotionally, and psychologically stale, have no zest for life, appear useless, become lonely, spiteful towards their fellow men and the whole environment, only to end up in suicide. And it is also the human beings for whom every time becomes too long, because in their wrong view, it does not want to pass away, and becomes a life-threatening nuisance for them.
That is absolutely correct, what you are explaining. But the cell decay explanations, etc., as they are presented by erring scientists, are fundamentally wrong.
But there is also the time phenomenon that occurs in the youth of the human beings. In this case, however, there is such a thing that what occurs in a pessimistic and negative way in the human beings as they grow older, that time does not want to pass, is a great impatience in youth, which refers to waiting for the coming of age. The time until then simply does not want to pass, because the waiting for majority and the ability to make one's own decisions about everything and anything is so eagerly awaited. When the age of majority is reached, impatience disappears, because the seriousness of coming of age brings completely new things, such as being independent, carrying one's own responsibility, many new duties and a new existence, which now needs to be explored on the one hand and lived on the other. This normally takes so long until the human beings grow out of the stage of late adolescence, and can effectively be described as adults in terms of consciousness. This is the case at the age of about 28 years, and is also about the time when for the human beings who are consciously thought-feeling psychologically healthy and normally conscious, their lifetime and the time in relation to their consciousness development, etc., begins to play a conscious role. After that, after about another 10 years, the state of apparent time haste respectively, that time seems to run out faster than in younger years of life. And this brings me back to what I said first. At least that is how I see the whole thing. I have already spoken to your father Svath about this, and he was of the same opinion.
That is also me.
All right, then we are in agreement. Then I have a question. It came to my mind days ago that Svath once explained to me that language is genetic. But I do not remember exactly what he explained.
That is correct. Genes determine that, on the one hand, logical thinking is used, and also that the human being can communicate logically with a language. Genes have determined this from the very beginning of man's existence, so that in this respect no comparison could be made with the monkey creatures that were incapable of language even in the early days of man's development. The linguistically distinct and logical possibilities of articulation and communication in the way they are, peculiar to the human beings, only appear in them and in beings who more or less or extensively have a conscious development of consciousness. It is to be said, however, that outside of the human line in higher life forms, approaches of articulation and communication as well as understanding possibilities of various kinds can develop, which as a rule remain modest.
If I mention earthly life forms, then, for example, parrots and bios in terms of speaking, and in terms of understanding the great apes, dolphins, horses, and dogs.
That is correct.
Look here. This is the report again, which I found on the internet 6 weeks ago and gave to you with the request, if you can clarify the whole thing. The KAZ-2 was found floating off the north coast of Australia in April 2007. The yacht's engine was running. On board were a fully functional GPS and laptop, as well as the life jackets and valuables of the missing 3 crew members. The owner of the yacht, Derek Batten, and his friends Peter and James Tunstead were experienced sailors. They could also not be found after a thorough search. It was suspected that they might have been caught in a storm and washed away from board. But after a storm, there should have been more disorder. The possibility of a kidnapping could not be confirmed either. There was probably an accident on board where one of the men fell into the water. In an attempt to rescue him, the others must also have fallen from the ship. The yacht then left very quickly with the engine running and strong winds. Batten and the Tunsteads probably drowned. Now the question is whether you were able to find out anything in the meantime. Just what happened and what happened to the men.
That is what I wanted to tell you about today, because the research, which I did not do myself, but Njana and Florina did, has shown that the 3 men who were on the ship, it was a sailing catamaran, almost 10 meters long, were torn from the ship into the depths of the sea by a giant octopus 28 meters in total size. The nearer circumstances resulted from the men's fishing.
So a giant octopus and 8-armed cephalopod, respectively a giant octopus with huge suction cup tentacles, which are also commonly called arms. The octopus should not be confused with a giant squid, because this is a 10-armed cephalopod which, unlike the octopus, has fins that are capable of swimming. But if you are talking about the overall size of the giant octopus, then this is probably to be understood as the length of the head structure as well as the length of the tentacles stretched out on both sides, right?
Of course.
This is really gigantic. Well, recently I read in a newspaper that many human beings everywhere are going crazy about the 21st of December, 2012, because this day has once again been proclaimed by esotericists and other lunatics as doomsday, just because of the end and new beginning of the Mayan calendar. It has been written that the churches and sects have become more popular again because the doomsday believers are full of fear. There are also many who sell their houses and all their belongings and spend the proceeds as a last resort before the end of the world and their lives, etc. In my opinion, this crazy behavior of the delusional believers continues as ever to lead to a series of suicides, which unfortunately cannot be prevented, nor can it prevent those who have fallen victim to the apocalyptic delusion from doing their crazy thing. It should be forbidden by law and strictly punishable that sects and their bosses as well as other lunatics and madmen are allowed to spread such an apocalyptic nonsense, and also to get rich, because these prophets of doom take their money out of the pockets of their fear-stricken believers for all this nonsense and enrich themselves with it and their belongings. Unfortunately, however, there are no such laws, because the whole thing is practiced under the cloak of freedom of belief, which is practically treated like a holy cow, and no distinction is made between a purely religious belief and a criminal and even criminal delusion. A religious belief can somehow still be accepted in a minor way, or simply smiled at and dismissed as a confused nonsense as long as it does not cause any harm, but a criminal or criminal dissemination of delusions should be prohibited and punishable. This is because it forces the human beings falling into delusion into a mental emotional fear of hell, and into a psychological and conscientious distress, and also into giving up all their possessions, their wealth, and even their lives, which consequently ends in suicide.
How right you are. This is indeed proving to be true all around, as we can also see for ourselves, and that is everywhere where the theory of the end of the world in relation to the 21st of December is widespread. A clear mind and a logical reason are unfortunately lacking in many Earth humans, especially those who belong to religious, sectarian, esoteric, and other similar groups.
Unfortunately, it is so, and it cannot be changed, because every human being has to find his own reason and logic and also reality and its truth. Just talking to the human beings in this respect does not help in any way, and is therefore of no use, because everyone has to develop a motivation of his own interest to consciously turn to what reality and truth is. And only then, When the human being does this consciously and acquire valuable knowledge and some wisdom according to reality and truth, can he free himself from all religious nonsense and from similar delusions? So for all those who believe the idiotic conspiracy theories, there is no success whatsoever in coming to their senses when they are taught reality and truth. Also not with regard to the 21st of December 2012, which will be a day like any other, and on which no end of the world or the end of the world respectively, or anything else abnormal or extraordinary will happen. On the 21st of December, 2, everything will take its usual course with the ensuing war and terror events of all kinds, with revolts against governments, etc., as well as crimes, murder and manslaughter, with quarreling and hatred as well as acts of revenge and retribution among the human beings. The natural events on the 21st of December are also in the usual increasing pattern of earthquakes and seaquakes, volcanic activity, rain and snow masses, storms and accidents, etc. But this is also perceived by very few human beings, except those who are themselves affected or who listen to the news on the radio, or watch it on television, or read it in newspapers. But this is usually not the great masses, but only a minority, and consequently, the great majority of humanity learns little or nothing about everything. But while I am at it, you once explained in an unofficial conversation that it was probably in 1975 on my great journey that global warming would cause the glaciers of Greenland and the mountain glaciers of the world, as well as the icy polar caps of the Arctic and Antarctic, respectively the North and South Pole, to melt in rapid succession, and that the ice masses would therefore dissolve. This has actually been happening for about 2 decades now, as you predicted, and it is now also scientifically acknowledged that this melting process is taking place. But you also said something about the fact that the extensive melting of the ice masses would cause sea levels to rise and also cause more earthquakes, although you did not explain anything more about this. Is it possible that you can explain a little bit more, by which I mean the connection with earthquakes?
First of all, I want to confirm your words that the coming 21st of December 2012 for the crazy conspiracy. Theorists, in connection with the end and new beginning of the Mayan calendar, once again prophesize the end of the world, which is thought without consideration by unreasoning believers. Will not bring about anything extraordinary and earth-shattering events, also not with regard to any abnormal natural events. But as far as your question is concerned, what I told you in 1975 about increasing earthquakes as a result of the worldwide melting of glaciers is based on the blatantly and still nature-destroying increasing overpopulation of the earthly humanity. It is already criminal to call what is happening with regard to the ever more rapidly increasing overpopulation a crime against humanity, because as a result of the growth of human beings, more and more people who are approaching the age of procreation are producing offspring who then grow up again and produce innumerable offspring again, which goes on and on. The population of the Earth on the 31st of December 2011, which was exactly 8,199,430,908, 8,199,430,908, has now increased again by around 100 million, and I will give you our latest and most accurate calculations on my next visit. As far as overpopulation is concerned, it is an enormous amount of harm and destruction to nature and the planet itself, as well as the ever-increasing greenhouse effect, which is causing the melting of glaciers and poles around the world and the resulting rise in sea levels. With regard to the earthquakes associated with the melting of glaciers, it is clear that the weight of the glaciers and the poles is rapidly diminishing by millions and even trillions of tons, which have been pressing on the land under the ice up to now and will continue to do so for some time to come. As a result of the melting, however, the weight of the glacier ice masses is constantly decreasing, so that the entire mass of the underlying land is slowly but surely being relieved and is rising upwards. This in turn relieves the lower layers and the continental plates, making them easier to move in their own different directions, pushing against each other and over each other, which inevitably leads to shaking movements and thus to earthquakes. Of course, this also happens where the tectonic plates also cause earthquakes through other collisions and overlapping movements. The immense pressure of large villages and cities, of reservoirs and huge accumulations of material can also cause earthquakes through their enormous ballast. There are also enormous explosions or the emptying of oil, gas, and water chambers, as well as the robbery of coal and ores, etc., from the interior of the earth and water masses deeply embedded in it. However, the climate change with the greenhouse effect caused by the fault of the unusually glaring overpopulation is accelerating the worldwide glacier melting process unusually strongly. And the whole thing will continue to happen in this way, because the now existing mass of Earth humans is inexorably driving the whole process of destruction forward, and this process can no longer be stopped. A small possibility of improvement would only be given if a worldwide and rigorous birth control would prevent a further blatant increase of the Earth's population and also drastically decimate it by such a control.
But to do that, everything would have to be regulated and enforced by the government, and violations would be punishable by sterilization.
That would indeed be the only possibility. But in general, the majority of humanity on Earth, above all those responsible in governments and in the sciences, is very poorly developed in terms of reason and logic, and is also selfish, so it will be a long time before the correct steps are taken by force.
If anything, which is questionable. Countless people believe that the production of human rabbit offspring is their absolute private right, even in these times of enormous overpopulation and all the destruction of nature, fauna, and flora, climate, and planets caused by it, which has long been proven to be the fault of the human beings. Already in the 1950s and 1960s, I wrote predictions about this and sent them by mail to terrestrial governments, to many authorities, as well as to newspapers, magazines, organizations, and radio stations. But out of some 3,000 predictions sent out in the 1950s, not a single reaction was received, not even in the 1960s.
That is known to me.
It would perhaps be good if the predictions of that time were printed again and distributed again. After all, it would also be possible to carry out letterbox campaigns once again, as well as sending the whole thing to governments and newspapers.
That can of course be done, and I agree. However, there is unlikely to be much agreement.
Already few can be many.
That is also true.
There are always new questions, so it would certainly be interesting and also important if you could explain something to me privately about in some detail.
I would like to do that, but there is no time for that today, so I will come back to it on my next visit. If you want to remind me then...
Of course I will, because the whole thing also interests me personally. I can consider myself lucky not to be confronted with it myself.
I know that.
Then again, a question about my new book. I've been making good progress with it since I started it on the 9th of November. But I think that I need some more information than you have given me now, because there are some more things that interest me, and that have just passed through my mind. Is it possible that Florina also knows about the depression diseases, or maybe Anjana, so that they could also help me when you are absent?
That is unfortunately not the case. At least not in the way that I can give you the necessary explanations.
Then I must refer to you alone for further necessary explanations.
That is correct, but I can only come back to you when I come back here in January next year. Until then, you will unfortunately have to wait.
No problem, because the information I have so far is enough to be able to continue to devote myself to the book and also to write in detail.
But you should set limits.
What do you mean I should set limits? Do you mean on the size of the book you are writing, or what?
No, my thoughts are that you will not take much time off, which is always the case when you write a new book. You work on it practically every day, without exception, to complete the work in a short time, because you always have a lot of other things to do, and time is always in short supply. It is only too aware of it.
I see. But do not worry, because I do not overdo it, because I know how to manage with my energy and strength.
Then so be it. And now I would like to talk to you about the following, which is of a private nature.